Hello, people. I finished a book, The Seven Ages of Paris. I'm going to try and make this short, but I got an awful lot of notes here. This is a wonderful book. It took me a couple of weeks to finish this, mostly because it had very small print, extremely small print. And just the way I'm set up in my bedroom here, it's really hard for me to read. That's not the author's fault. That's the publisher. But the author has an awful lot of stuff written in French in here. And every once in a while he gives you a translation, but most of the time, no. I've read that the author's name is Alastair Horn, and I've read a couple of books by him before. How Far from Austerlitz was a really good book, and he's got a couple in here that I wrote the titles down. I'm going to look for them. Probably won't be able to find them. 422 pages. This was published in 2002. And then I have small print written down there. First paragraph, page 22. See how well I can read in here because I did not turn on the light. All through Capetian France's struggles against the Plantagenets, Louis VII and his son had to contend with a powerful and often unpredictable player on the sidelines. Stalin's sneering question to Churchill during the Second World War, "How many divisions has the Pope?" would have been answered in the 12th century with "a great many." At the wave of the papal crucifix, or with the dispatch of a legate, each pope could summon up armies and nations to bring pressure to bear on miscreant rulers. In the Middle Ages, thoughts of death and eternal damnation were uppermost in all people's minds. Upon the spiritual state of grace at the moment of death depended happiness or misery for the whole of eternity. Though by the later Middle Ages, views on the afterlife had lost some of their certainty, in the 12th century notions of purgatory were little considered. It was a straight choice between the bosom of Abraham and the cauldron of hell. Such was the dread of eternal damnation, such the dread of excommunication or an interdict upon a whole nation, that the mere threat could reverse policies or even overturn thrones. Perhaps never again would the power and influence of the Pope be greater. Page 30. I don't know if this guy is just turning a phrase. He is a historian, and I am not. But on page 30, he's talking about the walls of Paris. And he says, towers built to deflect cannonballs. This was in the year 1202. Nobody was using cannons in the year 1202. In fact, I looked it up. The first European use of cannons was in 1346. I always go to 1453 because that's when the Turks were using cannon against Constantinople, and they were pretty primitive. They were just as liable to burst as they were to throw a cannonball. 1348, the Black Plague hits Paris. They believe cats are the source, and they believe cats are the source, so they start to kill off the cats. The cats were probably killing off the rodents, which were the source. On top of page 65. They always had some kind of weird thing against cats in Paris. I read once that when they were building new houses, they liked to entomb a cat inside the walls. For good luck, I don't know what the fuck it was. Top of page 65. Thus, hardly had France recovered from the 100 Years' War against England, then a new challenge appeared. Spain, released from Moorish bondage, and now under Charles V, allied by marriage to the Austrian Habsburgs. Boom! Habsburg with a B. Confronted France on both sides, east and west. Here were the beginnings of France's ensuing 4 centuries of conflict with the Germanic world. By the time of Francois' death in 1347, it should have been clear that the enduring problem for France was no longer Italy. And then we jump to the assassination of Henry IV. Henry IV was a fairly important guy in the history of the city of Paris. A lot of these guys, how many pages he spends in this book on the different rulers through the ages depends on how much architecture they were responsible for. Henry IV is assassinated in the year 1610, and I believe what I have here is an account of what they do to the assassin. Pretty grisly. On 27th May, still protesting that he had acted as a free agent on a divinely inspired mission, Ravaillac was put to death. Before being drawn and quartered, the fate of a regicide, on the scaffold erected at the Place de Grève, he was scalded with burning sulfur, molten lead, and boiling oil and resin, his flesh then being torn by pincers. After this hors d'oeuvre of inhumanity, his arms and legs were attached to horses, which then pulled in opposite directions. One of the horses foundered, so a zealous chevalier offered his mount. The animal was full of vigor and pulled away a thigh. After an hour and a half of this cruelty, Ravaillac died, as the mob tried to prevent him from receiving the last rites and urged the horses to pull harder. When what remained of the regicide finally expired, the entire populace, no matter what their rank, hurled themselves on the body with their swords, knives, sticks, or anything else to hand and began beating, hacking, and tearing at it. They snatched the limbs from the executioner, savagely chopping them up and dragging the pieces through the streets. Children made a bonfire and flung remnants of Ravaillac's body onto it. According to a witness, one woman actually ate some of the flesh. The executioner, who was supposed to have the body of the regicide reduced to ashes in order to complete the ritual as demanded by the law, could find nothing to bring his task to completion but the assassin's shirt. Seldom, even at the height of the terror, can the Paris mob have acted with greater ferocity. A ferocity born as much of fear as of grief and vengeance. But their frenzy also attested to the powerful sentiments of loyalty to the crown which Henry had done so much to rekindle. Page 159 out of 422 brings us to Napoleon Bonaparte. I've read a lot about Napoleon, and this is the first book that really concentrates on what he does in Paris, what kind of architecture he gives a shit about. But in 1804, Napoleon sent some kidnappers into Germany to kidnap this guy, the Duc d'Enghien. I don't know how to pronounce it. They kidnap him, bring him back, and they put him to death. This guy was a noble, and word of this spreads throughout the other nobles, and this was a horrible mistake by Napoleon. And Talleyrand, my buddy Talleyrand, says, worse than a crime, it was a blunder. Talleyrand was so cool. Second paragraph, page 220. Taking me a minute here. Bear with me. 220. Once more, the comic opera called the Italienne after the adjacent boulevard, also thrived. Home of the new romantic music, it was an epoch when concertgoers could hear Luigi Cherubini, director of the Conservatoire de Paris, Frédéric Chopin, Franz Liszt, and Hector Berlioz performed their works. Berlioz, who wrote the Magic Symphonie Fantastique for his Irish paramour while he was still only 30, its lilting romanticism offset by somber reminders of the guillotine that seemed to typify the age, remained unacknowledged. He died in 1869, crushed by the critics at the apogee of the Second Empire, while lesser musicians like Offenbach carried off the laurels. I really like Offenbach. I don't know why somebody would diss Offenbach like that. One of the coolest, very short areas in opera is the Doll Song by Offenbach. I can't remember the name of that opera. I've never seen it, but the Doll Song. There are many different women that sing it, and it's all over YouTube, and I really like the Doll Song. Second paragraph, page 243. The depiction of rampant hedonism under the Second Empire had its unsavory underside. Syphilis was rife, and still more or less incurable. Many of the great men of the age were to die of it, among them Maupassant, Jules Goncourt, Dumas, Baudelaire, and Manet. Renoir once lamented that he could not be a true genius because he alone among his friends had not caught syphilis. This dreadful disease was symptomatic of the whole Second Empire. On the surface, all brightness and high spirits, beneath, darkness, decay, and ultimately death. Second and third paragraph, page 260. I think I got carried away here with some of this reading, but there was a lot here that I wanted to mark and I didn't. Second and third, huh? Okay. Early in October, even bourgeois Paris had turned to horse meat. Oh, we must be in the siege. Early in October, even bourgeois Paris had turned to horse meat, first introduced by Parisian butchers 4 years before as a low-cost food for the poor. As hunger tightened its grip, so many a splendid champion of the turf came to a well-spiced end in the casserole. Among them were 2 trotting horses presented by the Tsar to Louis Napoleon at the time of the Great Exposition, originally valued at 36,000 francs, now bought by a butcher for 800. It was then that Parisians invented the exotic menus with which the siege will always be linked. The signs feline and canine butchers made their first appearance. To begin with, dog-loving Parisians objected fiercely to slaughtering domestic pets for human consumption, but soon necessity overcame their fastidiousness. By mid-December, Henry Labouchere, the besieged resident of the London Daily News, was telling his readers, "I had a slice of spaniel the other day," adding that it made him feel like a cannibal. A week later, he reported that he had encountered a man who was fattening up a large cat, which he planned to serve up on Christmas Day, surrounded with mice like sausages. Théophile Gautier claimed that cats and dogs in the city rapidly sensed their changed status. Now, this next thing is from a diary that was written during the siege. I have a real old book that was written in like 1872 that has the entire diary. Soon the animals observed that man was regarding them in a strange manner, and that under the pretext of caressing them, His hand was feeling them like the fingers of a butcher to ascertain the state of their embonpoint. More intellectual and more suspicious than dogs, the cats were the first to understand and adopted the greatest prudence in their relations. uh, Second paragraph, page 268. The outstanding British historian of France, Richard Cobb, was always struck by the mediocrity of the communards. They were, above all, des candidates. Never can the leadership of a political movement have been so naive, so incoherent, and so incompetent. Except for the horrible police chief Raoul Rigaud, most were innocents who were not built for the scale of such tragic events. The best one could say of the Commune was to define it as a tragic irrelevance, hopeless from the start, yet basically well-intentioned. The brief spring of a Paris attempting to break away. As events were to prove, however, the Commune was overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of aims arising out of the mismatch of personalities, ideologies, and interests that it embraced. Kimber, what the hell are you doing out here? And Adolf Thiers, the guy that eventually crushes the Commune. One of the things that I never realized about good old Adolf is that he was on the other side of the barricades in 1830 and twice in 1848. Page 271. I gotta go to page 271. And this one I'm supposed to find. Late that night, Dąbrowski, who was a Polish guy that was, he was one of the leaders of the Commune, was brought under arrest to the Hotel de Ville by the National Guard, allegedly attempting to escape through the Prussian lines. He was the second of the Commune's few competent military commanders to fall, attempting to escape through the Prussian lines. All the time that this Commune thing was going on, the Prussians are still surrounding Paris. And it's not really accurate to say the Prussians, because, there was Bavarians there, there was Saxons there. All of Germany was there. Between the wars, they talk about a woman whose name is Josephine Baker. She came from the United States. There's a picture of her in here, semi-naked, showing her breasts. She was a very attractive woman. She came from America. And, between the wars was a really weird time. That's what I'm reading right now. I'm about 50 pages into a book. It was a very liberating time, not just in France, but in Germany also. But if you've got a minute, Google this Josephine Baker. She was a very free-spirited woman. One of the things they say about her in here is, as soon as she got to Paris, she went to her hotel room and fucked the bellhop because she wanted to know what it was like to sleep with a Frenchman. De Gaulle, page 375. We'll jump way to De Gaulle. He was another interesting guy. Wounded and taken prisoner at Verdun. Apparently, the Germans that interviewed him said to De Gaulle, "Do you know that your name means the French?" And they said, "Do you know that your name used to mean the French?" And De Gaulle said, "It still does." So he comes out of retirement. He's a very old man. And he's running the country like in the 50s and the 60s. And this is one of the funny things he says. He says, one can't impose unity out of the blue on a country that has 265 different kinds of cheese. And then at the end, it goes to Coco Chanel. Coco Chanel during the occupation, during the 4-year occupation in the Second World War. And I had no idea that Coco Chanel was, slept with a German officer for the entire 4 years. And, she may have even got her head shaved. I think that's it. Fuck 20 minutes. Thanks for watching.